To begin, let's do recruiting first, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
going to kick off today's show with recruiting news, and obviously Thursday night, 7:30. It is Thursday, correct?
Yes.
It's still Thursday. Thursday night at 7:30, we'll be going live because Jaiden Ausberry, a 2023 linebacker from the state of Louisiana, who is the number 38 overall player in the country by ESPN. I have a comment about that here in a little bit. He will be making his decision. It's basically down to Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Michigan, Auburn, LSU is in the mix a little bit as well, but it's really going to be Texas A&M, Michigan, and Auburn as the primary contenders for him. He also listed Alabama amongst his finalists in regard to his decision on Thursday night. So obviously that could potentially be a big thing for Notre Dame, adding to their number 1 overall ranked class. We'll find out for sure on Thursday night. I'll just leave this out there, Ryan, and then we'll move on to our next topic. I do not expect that to be the only commitment that we see made by a Notre Dame target this week. I actually think it won't. There might be a couple this week. So little tease for y'all there. Let's move on to the next recruiting topic. Or actually, let's stick on this one, Ryan, because, we're looking at Notre Dame's recruiting class and we're looking at the front 7 recruiting, and it's already right now the best front 7 class in the country, but a lot of teams have incomplete front 7 classes.
Sure.
To me, Jaiden Ausberry is a must get in so many ways. Number 1, tapping into Louisiana is huge. In most years, I think it's either Louisiana or Mississippi. But normally Louisiana, sometimes Mississippi might sneak in there, are the highest per capita NFL producers, so they don't match Georgia, Florida, Texas, California, just because it's such a smaller state, just numbers. But, based on per capita per population, which is what that means, it's one of the best producers of talent when it comes to putting guys in the NFL. So getting into that state is important for Notre Dame. Notre Dame has had a lot of success in that state with some really good players over the years. Mike, going all the way back from my lifetime, Michael Stonebreaker back on the 1988, team. Obviously, Jerry Tillery was, Notre Dame has only had one defensive lineman go in the first round during Brian Kelly's tenure, and it was Jerry Tillery from Louisiana. So it's been a good state for Notre Dame. They're trying to make it an even bigger state. Obviously, Logan Diggs is the guy they got recently out of Louisiana. They're hoping it's going to have a big season this year. You're looking at, obviously, Jaiden Ausberry being another one, and they're hoping that they can add him to this class. Obviously, being a kid from Baton Rouge, knowing who their head coach is big, but more practically speaking, that's kind of fun to throw shade. Oh, you beat Brian Kelly for guys, but at the end of the day, that's not going to win you a championship because of that. Sure. It's because of this is a really good football player. And you talk about guys that fit Notre Dame, Ryan. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about him specifically a lot more, but when there's a kid like this from there, it's almost kind of like you can't afford to not get him because you just don't see kids like him come along very often.
Well, I know people are going to hyper-focus on the fact, and you mentioned it already, the fact that you get a top 40 caliber player right in University Lab, which is literally on LSU's campus. So that's the first thing you're going to say is, wow, Notre Dame beat LSU for Jaiden Ausberry if he does select the Irish on Thursday. But it goes deeper than that, Brian, in my opinion. Like you mentioned, Alabama wants him. Auburn wants him. Texas A&M wants him. The fact of the matter is that Notre Dame has a chance to beat a lot of SEC powers for Jaiden Ausberry. It's not just LSU. You beat Bama. You beat Texas A&M, 2 of the best recruiting staffs right now in college football for a guy like Jaiden Ausberry, and getting him out of the South to come up to South Bend, Indiana. It's a big deal, man. It is a tremendous deal. And I know we talked about this a bunch. I mean, the 2022 cycle of linebackers, hard to beat that, right? I mean, when you're talking about guys like Junior Tuihalamaka and Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler and, Joshua Burnham, who is now playing Viper for Notre Dame, but was a highly touted linebacker recruit as well. Coming after that and next cycle, getting a Drake Bowen and then potentially a Jaiden Ausberry to couple with a Preston Zinter and maybe a Samuel Mpemba down the line as well. Notre Dame has a chance to put together 2 tremendous linebacker groups. And Jaiden Ausberry, you could argue, is the best player of the bunch.
I would go with Drake Bowen, but it's arguable. And that's the point. And some recruiting services have Jaden ranked higher, some have Drake ranked higher. But the point is what have we always talked about? It's about stacking up big time classes year after year after year, and that's what it would be. Now they got to close on them, right? That's the key. Okay, but we like where Notre Dame is at. right now going in, but as we've seen it time and time again, anything can happen between, when a kid says he's going to decide and when he actually decides, and then of course when he signs. So Jaiden Ausberry is a guy that Notre Dame has to get, must get, athletic player. We did a film breakdown on him recently. You can check that out. And we'll talk a lot more about him on Thursday night, but just wanted to kind of preview that a little bit. This is a big time commitment. And it would be hard for me to fathom anybody passing Notre Dame's front seven if they get Jaiden Ausberry. And I don't care about the recruiting rankings aspect of it, because we've seen some silliness going on with Drake Bowen, and we've seen some silliness with Jaiden Ausberry. I mean, he was in the 90s by On3, and then after he goes and basically is the top linebacker at the Future 50 event, he drops 100 spots, and just some silliness going on. But the fact is these are both top 100 football players. You've got 3 guys on the defensive line that are ranked as top 100 football players. If they're able to get Jaiden Ausberry, every single one of their commits is ranked in the front 7. That would make 7 of them. 7, right? All 7 of them would be ranked inside the top 250 by at least one service. This Preston Zinter is a top 250 kid by Rivals. I believe he still is. He might have dropped out in their most recent update, but I believe he's still a top 250 kid. So that would certainly be big. Would be big, but they got to close, right? And that's what we'll find out on Thursday night.
Yep.
Some other recruiting. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say we're going to move on to another recruit, Brian, which is a very different recruits, because we have seen Jaiden Ausberry's been on the board for Notre Dame for a very long time. Notre Dame, a couple weeks ago, at this point now, week and a half ago, offered Derby running back, that is a Kansas school, by the way, Dylan Edwards, who was at the point when Notre Dame offered up Dylan Edwards, was committed to Kansas State, which he plays in Kansas. His dad went to Kansas State. There's obviously a lot of family ties to the Wildcat program over there. So, Brian, I believe when we went through the timeline before we started, right? So I believe he was offered last Tuesday. Then he takes the visit. I believe it was on Thursday, if I remember correctly, or Wednesday. Wednesday or Thursday, right in the middle of the week. Gets on campus before the dead period starts, right? You need to get on campus before all that stuff happens. And then on Friday, we have not talked about this on the podcast,
right,
but Friday night, he decides, I'm going to decommit from Kansas State.
Right. And we were getting some updates from multiple people sort of from that state. They're saying, no, look, he's probably not going to decommit. His dad played there. He's kind of a legend there. He's pretty committed there, all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, bam, Friday evening decommitment. And we knew it was coming that day, but we knew it was coming a little bit before that. But going into that day, I was not anticipating Dylan Edwards decommitting. And that was a pretty big deal. He obviously got offered by Oregon today. So now that he's decommitted, other schools are getting involved with him. But that was a big deal. I mean, just the time, the events leading up to it, gets the offer, visits, and then decommits from Kansas State. And I mean, it won't shock me, Ryan, if a decision from him comes soon, one way or the other. But this is a big time player, because you're bringing in a guy. We talked about this last week, right? There's different types of players that you recruit and offer, and not everybody. Everybody wants to, what position is he going to play? And it's it doesn't matter, y'all. It's just, he's being recruited to do a lot of different things. And I think sometimes we focus too much in recruiting on putting guys into boxes, because on a list, it's well, you got your running back, you got your receiver, some guys are recruited to not be that, right? Jeremiah Love is being recruited as a dynamic football player. Dylan Edwards is being recruited as a dynamic football player. Ronan Hannafin is being recruited as a dynamic football player. Now, they got to start somewhere.
Sure.
And I'd say of those 3, Ronan's probably the most locked into a position. Jeremiah Love is a very close second. Dylan Edwards is third in regard to, where guys are in that list. But when you look at Dylan, it's what's he being recruited to do? Rip off big plays in some capacity. He'll be a return man, right? And when you think about adding him, if Notre Dame's able to get him, this is hypothetical. If in that instance, if Notre Dame were to get him, you're adding him and Micah Bell and Peyton Bowen in the same class. That's three guys that are sub 4.4 guys, that are 4.3 guys that are also dynamic in the return game. And we've kind of talked about this with the current team. There's just not a lot of guys that are natural returners. You're adding 3, in my opinion, that are natural returners in this class if you can close on Dylan Edwards, and then obviously keep the current guys you have in the class. So, and then what's he going to do on offense? A little bit of everything, right? Slot receiver, can do some things out of the backfield. He's not a guy you're going to put at running back, and he's a running back like you're going to give him 15 handoffs. He's 5'8", 5'9", 155 to 165 pounds, depending on who you listen to, who you read. He's the kind of kid that you look at, Ryan, and say, it's just, what's he going to do? Get the ball, right? And you had a comparison for him that I thought really made a lot of sense from a size standpoint and from a usage standpoint, but this kid is even more dynamic. Why don't you go ahead and share that comparison you had on the board the other day?
Yeah, I mean, he reminds me a lot of DeAnthony Thomas that, was a California kid, played at Oregon, obviously, and Black Mamba nickname. And he was a very slight running back, right? Like that was his designation on the roster, right about 5'9". And I mean, what was he, 180 pounds, probably soaking wet by the time he was a junior in college, right? So like he was a smaller running back. And everyone knew that he wasn't going to be a guy that was going to carry the ball, to your point. He's not going to carry the ball 15 to 20 times a game, but he could carry it 8 to 10 and then have another 5 to 6 catches and also be a dynamic punt returner. And that's what I see with a guy like a Dylan Edwards. Is he going to be a 200 carry a year guy if as a running back? No, absolutely not. But what he can be is he'd be a dynamic slot who works the RPO game, makes people miss, home run ability with that 4.3 speed. And then, hey, you want to give him some jets? Cool. You want to give him an end around? Cool. You want to line him up in the backfield, give him a toss sweep,
or run, if you with a quarterback like Tyler Buckner, run some power read with him where you're either running up the middle with him in the backfield with Tyler Buckner, or you're getting him on the outside in your read zone type of stuff. And you can occasionally run him between the tackles as well. As a keep him honest type of situation. There's no doubt about it. And 100%. Think about this, Ryan. DeAnthony Thomas, I believe, ran in the 4.5s at the
4.5 flat. 4.5 flat.
This kid's a sub 4.4 already.
Yes.
Just to put his speed into context, Peyton Bowen has been marked as a 4.38. He ran that at Notre Dame. Zechariah Branch, who's a 5-star USC commit, has been talked about as a 4.3 guy. Dylan Edwards at the Future 50 down at IMG beat both of them in sprints and 40-yard dash at that event. So he is the Chris Tyree of this class, essentially. When you talk, because remember, Chris Tyree won the fastest man competition back-to-back years at the opening. And that's essentially what that event was essentially like a different version of the opening. Because I don't think the opening is a thing anymore. You say didn't do it this summer anyway.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what that was. And so Notre Dame wants more speed. He is dynamic, and that's why ultimately Notre Dame pulled the trigger on the offer and now is looking to take him. Now, we talked last week that he gave you some protection in case you did miss on somebody else. But as we've done more intel, it's more of they're comfortable with taking him and it not being a situation where he then takes somebody else's spot. So if Jeremiah Love and if Ronan Hannafin both decided to come to Notre Dame, they're taking all of them, which is kind of where they were a month ago when you look at Micah Tease.
Sure.
Because Micah Tease was potentially going to be that 5th receiver. They thought about maybe making Christian Hamilton that guy. Well, now you've got a guy that's even more dynamic. Now, is he a natural at any position? No. But what he's natural at, Ryan, is with the ball in his hands. And you figure out a way to do that. What
did he have? 38 rushing touchdowns last year. And I know it's playing in Kansas, not the highest quality of football, but he's playing at the highest class in Kansas. So it's not like he's playing the worst players also in the state of Kansas. So, I mean, he averaged over, 12 yards a carry or some crazy number. The numbers are just ridiculous. And to your point, Notre Dame has always toyed with the idea of taking 5 receivers. They've always done it because even before the Christian Hamilton, Micah Tease thing, right? Rodney Gallagher was the slot target. He comes off the board. You're still going to take a guy like a Micah Tease potentially. You wanted Micah Tease before he chose Arkansas. Christian Hamilton was a guy that you thought about for a little bit. But regardless, Notre Dame wants this type in this class. This is the dynamic slot that can also give you a lot of impact as a returner, to your point as well. So they need this type of player, this style of player, and it looks like they're making him a priority. It's not a plan B conversation with a guy like a Dylan Edwards. This is a plan A 5th wide receiver.
Right. And now it's taken some time to get there. Right. And I think that and honestly, from my understanding, it wasn't a given that he was going to be a take until the visit. Because I think the film, when the concern when you watch the film is this guy 5'8", 5'9", 160, or is he 5'6" and a half, 145? I mean, because kids can. I was 6'1" and a half, 185 coming out, 190 coming out of high school. At least that's what I put on my questionnaires when, I was being recruited by teams, because I thought 6'2" might be too much of a stretch on film. You know what I mean? I'm 6 feet tall, but you
Mhm.
do those things to try to gain, attention, right? Because then they see 6 foot. There's the stigma that comes with that. During the visit, they kind of met the kid. They sized him up. Matt Bayless was able to see him, and it was kind of like, yeah, this kid's a guy that we want to have. So I would say, is he a plan B from the standpoint of he wasn't in your original push? Yes.
Sure.
But to Ryan's point, the board evolves over different periods of time. And this kid has really been a breakout this summer with a number of really standout performances. I think he opened some eyes with his future 50 speed thing. Because as you said, it's like, yeah, kid's dynamic for Kansas, but is he really dynamic when you talk about comparing him to kids from Texas and Florida? When he went down to the future 50, I think that opened some eyes up. Because Notre Dame's known about him. They've liked his film. His numbers are insane. He's got over 4,000 yards rushing and over 60 touchdowns the last 2 years. I also know one of our board members, or one of our people that's in our show, is also a member of our message boards from Kansas. He's been pushing Dylan Edwards on me for months. Like, I hope Notre Dame offers him. I hope Notre Dame offers him. I hope they can offer him. All these type of things. But he said the kid rarely plays in the second half. I mean, Derby just crushes teams. Like, apparently that's like the best. Again, this is me just relaying what I was told by someone from Kansas. Apparently, like, that's the best program in the state, and they just dominate people. So that adds even more context to his 2,600 rushing yards. He doesn't play in the second half of many games.
Right.
So the kids, it's kind of like Jack Kaiser. You say, well, he played 1A. Yeah, but his numbers are so insane at that level that he's not just some 1A guy who happens to be the best 1A. He is a big-time football player at a small level.
Right.
And that's a reality. And I think that's what Notre Dame needed to size up, is like, okay, does this guy really fit what we can handle size-wise? And once you check those boxes, like, yeah, let's take him. And it didn't mean like, okay, we're moving on from Ronan Hannafin. I can assure you they haven't. I've had some people mention, like, is they moved on from Ronan Hannafin? No, they have definitely not moved on from Ronan Hannafin. Are they worried about Jeremiah Love? No, they're not. They still feel they're in good position with both of those guys. We've had updates on them on the message board the last couple of days. It's just that he kind of stepped up and said, yeah, this is a guy we can't turn down. And as I've said, it's because of the fact this staff is obsessed. I'm going to use that word. It's obsessed. And I mean that this is a good thing. They're obsessed in this class of adding speed to the roster. And they're trying to do it at every single position they can. And as good as the receivers they've landed are, Braylon James of the three, Braylon James, Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, Braylon James, the only one that you can consider a speed guy. Jaden Greathouse is a stud. He's not a speed guy. Rico Flores is a really productive, good football player. He's not a speed guy. Ronan Hannafin is, in my opinion. And if they can get and Dylan Edwards is. So if they can add Ronan Hannafin and Dylan Edwards, this becomes, we've talked about whether or not this could be a gap closing, gap racing class. Then it becomes a situation, Ryan, where if you add this kid and what he can bring and Ronan Hannafin, yes, gap closed. You still need another year next year because of the depth, but this is a big-time class. Now, next year, you're shooting for dudes because you don't need 4. If you can get those 2, you don't need 4 next year. You're back to now kind of 3 being a more realistic number, which means you can now focus on the best of the Wingos, the Micah Hudsons, the Emmett Mosleys, like and other guys like them. I'm not trying to leave everybody off. I just don't want to list the entire board. Sure. But, guys like that can now be your focus. And so, yeah, these are important recruits. Now, again, Notre Dame's got to close on both of those guys. And there's still work to be done. But I feel, as of today, I feel really good about where Notre Dame has placed themselves with those 2 prospects.
Yeah, I do as well. And I'll say this too, Brian. Now you have, if Notre Dame's able to close on a Dylan Edwards, you don't have to force a round peg into a square hole full time, right? Because we've talked about, like, what does the slot look like if this is the 4-man class you leave with, if Ronan Hannafin does come aboard and you're like, okay, well, Ronan can play in the slot, we think, right? Jaden Greathouse can play in the slot, but like, they're not perfect slot types, right? But this Edwards kid, he can be that. So now you're like, wow, if I have Ronan Hannafin and I have a Braylon James. They're my outside receivers, and Jaden Greathouse can kind of move all over the place, right? And you got Dylan Edwards in the slot, and Rico Flores can kind of do a little bit of inside outside. So now you have so many different possibilities, which is a lot of fun. I'm going to test your Kansas knowledge for a second, Brian, because I don't know the answer to this question. I didn't even look it up, so I don't have an answer for you. If they get Dylan Edwards, Notre Dame, he would be the second player in this class from the state of Kansas. Joe Otting, of course, being the other one, the offensive lineman out of Topeka. When's the last time Notre Dame has signed 2 players out of the state of Kansas?
I don't know about 2. I mean, I think the last guy they got out of Kansas was Brian Smith.
Yeah.
So, and that was during the Weiss era. I don't remember anybody else being from Kansas, to be honest with you. So, I that's a good question. Another reason why I miss Lou Samoji. You know, like
Right.
I'd be able to pop up get on the phone and be like, "Hey, Lou, when was the last time they signed 2 guys from Kansas?" And I'd have your answer before you finished asking it. But honestly, I mean, I don't know that they've signed anyone from Kansas in Brian Kelly's. I mean, it in the Brian Kelly tenure. And again, that's not a criticism. It's Kansas, right? It's just.
Sure.
But I think Brian Smith is the last guy that I can think of off the top of my head. Last guy I can think of. So, and I doubt that they signed 2 guys.
Yeah,
in that class. So yeah, it's a good question.
I'm curious. I'm more curious if it's ever happened, to be honest with you. I would love to just have that general knowledge. Like it's because this isn't like me like, oh wow, Notre Dame needs to start prioritizing Kansas. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is it's a little bit of an oddity to
but it's about taking advantage of the years when those things are the case. Like if Notre Dame signs Ronan Hannafin, again, this is a if. We're just talking hypothetically here. And give them 3 players from the state of Massachusetts that are all, in my view, top 100 caliber players. Well, no, 2 of the 3 are top 100 caliber players. Preston Zinter's more of a top 250 guy to me, but 3 definite top 250 players. When was the last time the state of Massachusetts produced that many guys that were ranked that high, period, much less that they all went to Notre Dame? So is it now Massachusetts is a state you're going to get 3 to 4 kids from every year? No, some years maybe. I mean, that state clearly is getting better. I mean, because they're not going to get Samson Okalola. That's arguably the best guy in the state. I mean, there's other kids from Massachusetts. You look and say, "What? That guy can play some football." You know what I mean?
Sure.
One of their top O-line targets in the 2024 class is a kid from Bubakar's high school,
Gerby Lambert. Yeah.
So right, Gerby Lambert. So when it is strong, you take advantage. And that's the thing about the state of Kansas. There are 2 big-time football players that Notre Dame believes are that caliber player. And so they're going for both of them. And if they can get both, obviously Joe Otting being the other, then you take advantage of it. Just like if there's going to be years where Notre Dame's not going to get anybody from Chicago. But when Chicago has those kind of guys, you take advantage and you load up. There's going to be years they don't sign anybody in state. There's going to be other years you hope they get 4 or 5 guys in state. When those years are there, you got to take advantage. And I think that's what they're looking to do here in the state of Kansas. Because there's not that in-state school that's the powerhouse program that you look at and say, boy, well, I don't know if kids committed to Texas. I don't know if we can go down there and flip them from Texas, right?
Right.
Kansas State's a good football program. Chris Kleiman is one of my favorite coaches in college football. That guy's doing a great job at Kansas State, in my opinion. And now he's got to get the quarterback situation figured out because every time they lose Skylar Thompson injury, they're just not the same team. And that's just the margin for error at a place like that. But I love what he's building there. And if they can flip Dylan Edwards from there, that's huge. And then there's another kid from there. There's another 4-star kid from the state, Avery Johnson, a quarterback that, you say, hey, look, could Notre Dame try to play the long game and get involved with him if they can't flip one of the 2 kids that they're going after now? I'd give it a shot.
Sure.
I'd be a little less – if they get Hannafin and Edwards, I'd be a little less – okay, I don't know if he'd be at the top of my board then, simply because the whole point of Avery Johnson was if he can't play quarterback, you can move him somewhere else. Well,
right,
you're kind of loaded up now at those positions in this class, but
unless you can play safety, I guess. But
right, but you don't turn down that if you can get that kind of dynamic player, it's hard to turn it down. So that's kind of where we're at, Ryan, with him. I think the other player that's kind of out there that visited recently is Ben Minich, excuse me, the safety from Ohio. Been hard to get a hold of him. We've tried to do as much digging as we can. We believe that his recruitment will be over somewhat soon. We'll find out when. We think that right now Notre Dame is in the best position with him. So we don't have a ton on him just because we can't get Ben on the phone or to respond to stuff. But from what we've heard from sources, Notre Dame did a great job answering all his questions during his recent visit. And so they're in a good position there. So that's kind of the latest with Ben Minich. So I think you're talking about, you're seeing some movement in the board, right? You're seeing the board expand recently. They've added good football players to the board. Now it's about closing. Quarterback right now, obviously it's Austin Novosad. They're still recruiting him. He's still out there. As it's the same as we've said to you before. I think it's going to come down to Baylor or Notre Dame. Ryan, we've kind of felt that this is trending towards Baylor for a little bit, sticking with his commitment. Notre Dame is still pushing there. Notre Dame, Kenny Minich announced his offer from Notre Dame this weekend.
Yep.
That offer came out previously. It's just Kenny finally announced it. So we were kind of sitting on that for a little bit because that's his news to share, not ours.
100%.
I think the fact that he announced the offer tells me that there's at least some level of interest, but it's way too early for us to be talking about, flipping him or all that. I do have a good buddy who used to coach in the state of Tennessee that said he thinks the kid will definitely be open to Notre Dame, but not necessarily will it ultimately end up with a flip. We don't know. Because I think it's kind of like the Drew Tranquil thing several years ago. Like Drew knew that Notre Dame was the best place for him, but he had been committed to Purdue for so long. It's kind of like, I want to do the right thing, and it can be a tough for a kid that's got some sort of level of loyalty and commitment. Flipping is not an easy thing. It doesn't mean that ultimately that's not the best decision for a kid. It's just that's just the kind of the reality of it. So we'll see how those things pan out. But and if they can't get one of those two, they'll just keep expanding the board of quarterback. But I think right now, those are definitely the top two guys on the board.